so there was a level of obviously stress and overwhelm that was impacting my health. I was completely immersed in my career, working really long days, ignoring my health.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global... I'm going to start that again. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Okay.
Okie dokie. Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own interest to help others. And today I have the lovely and very patient Jenalee Anderson, who has a history working in corporate planning, which is listed as one of the top 5 stressful jobs to have. Now, after 8 years of doing that, she was a little bit burnt out, had a health crisis, had some surgery, and then dove deep into taking proactive steps to live a more balanced life, which has then led her to her new career and where she helps other people transform their life with her business called Expert You. Welcome, Jenna. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for being patient. And just to be completely transparent for the audience, normally I don't have cuts in my show, but I did a big fumble at the start and my technology went crazy and we did a second take. So thank you for being very patient with that, Jenalee. I really appreciate it. Do you want to start? Let's jump in the Wayback Machine. Now, you might remember this or might know of this as a silver DeLorean from Back to the Future that Doc Brown invented.
Yes.
Exactly.
The wing doors, right?
Exactly. That's the one.
Yeah.
So let's jump in that. You can be in the driver's seat. Let's hit 88 miles an hour. I'll sit next to you and holding onto the dash, and we can travel through time. Can you take us back in time to some key events that impacted you? And I've touched on a couple there, but do you want to elaborate on them or any other key events that really impacted your life and helped you become the person you are today to help people the way you're helping them today?
Yeah. I definitely would have to say being in that corporate job was, at the time, really difficult, but reflecting back on it, I can see the gift that it really was because it's what has taken me to where I am today. And so there was a level of obviously stress and overwhelm that was impacting my health. I was completely immersed in my career, working really long days, ignoring my health, ignoring my mental health, my relationships, like you name it. I was very all in on this career. And I think part of what is kind of sad is that's often expected of us in the corporate world. And it caught up with me. And so when I started to feel ill, it kind of really made me rethink and question what I was doing and what the connection was. Like, what could I do to be healthy? And that's where it led me to my own discovery, I guess, of what I was missing in my life and what I was ignoring and what I needed more of and who I was and all of those existential questions that we can really do a good job at avoiding for quite some time until we're forced to look at it. And so that was definitely a very impactful moment in my life. Looking back, it was almost an out of body experience. Like, I noticed myself just very disconnected from who I was. I would see myself acting and behaving in ways that weren't who I saw myself to be or who I wanted to be. And so whether that's like being really short with people or just being really frustrated and upset day to day, it was like I was watching myself behave that way and I had lost like that ability to control what that looked like. And so, yeah, it's been a journey for sure to kind of go back and uncover what those things are and just create that connection and constant dialogue with making sure that who I'm showing up with on the outside is what's on the inside as well.
What do you think from that perspective when you look back at it was, the drive? Because a lot of people do that. We go into this, doing that corporate job or whatever it is, but we're putting so much effort into it, denying ourselves the health needs that we have. What is the
Mhm.
driver, do you think, when you look back at it? What why did you do that? What was the reason for doing that?
I think a lot of it is culture. Like I was doing what everyone around me was doing. I
Mm,
didn't know anyone that was thinking any differently at the time. And it really took just a one off friend on Facebook, actually, to even hear someone thinking about paying attention to their health or asking those questions of why is my relationship not going so well? Like no one around me was having those conversations. And so it kind of took that exposure to that different way of being and thinking that I was like, oh, like what else is out there? And it really led me to kind of, I guess it gave me permission to kind of ask those questions too. And that's where I started to kind of uncover everything that I wanted to know.
do you think that's because it seems to be a similar sort of thing? People just do it because it's expected of us. And I look at, even look in my family history, my dad worked in the same organization his entire career, and I couldn't even begin to count how many different organizations I've worked for over my life. Um, and when you talk about that culture, is it just sort of, do you think as human beings we're kind of like lemmings? We look at what's around us and we follow what other people are doing around us? Is that what you
Abs-
think happens?
Absolutely. I think our environment has a huge impact on who we are, how we think, like our beliefs. And so I think if our parents instilled that belief in us that you need to get a job and you need to stick in it for 30 years because of pension or
Gold watch?
um, yeah, or work isn't supposed to be fun or life isn't fair, those beliefs that were
Mm,
just ingrained in us, so that made us accept things that weren't exciting to us. And it's also that culture of like living for retirement, right? It's like, oh, you're supposed to work hard now and then have fun later in life.
mm.
And so I think it's like a ton of that programming that's just floating around where we've kind of accepted that, oh, work is supposed to be terrible and I'm not supposed to really enjoy it. And that's normal. And that's what the price you have to pay to get a paycheck. It's a lot of beliefs around that.
From that perspective, is it, from your, do you look at it and go, well, is it that we're not really listening to other things that are out there? Because when we look at life, for example, the way our brain works, a reticular activating system will filter what we see or what we are aware of. And do you think it's a case that that information is always in front of us, but we're actually reinforcing our own beliefs of, we need to do that until we get a wake up call?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more comfort for us, like as human beings, we're creatures of comfort. There's comfort in the known. And
Mm,
so that information seeking side of like uncovering the truth is actually very uncomfortable. And
yeah.
so it's healthier, yes, but it's not comfortable. And so I think a lot of people would choose comfort in those moments. And so I
Mm,
think that's what takes them and me to that edge where you have to look at it because you're faced with a crisis or you're hitting issues at some aspect of your life that really are demanding you to take a look at it, because otherwise you can live on for quite some time just oblivious or comfortable to what you do know.
yeah, is that, I mean, because that, when you say it really takes for a lot of people that wake up call, which is they hit rock bottom, becomes really difficult, really uncomfortable, that forces them out of that situation. And I'm relaying that. One of my business partners, she said to me once, she said, we learn through pain until we learn to learn through joy. Is it a case that we need to go until we get to a certain point that we're actually learning from joy, learning to enjoy, the life that we have in front of us, that we have to go through that pain until we actually, because we need that wake up call to actually look beyond what we know?
I think it depends on the person. I don't think we need the pain to wake up, and I encourage my clients to like, don't. I wouldn't recommend it. We don't need to take that hard road.
Mm,
I think it's a matter of like before you even assess like a major change in your life. I think the first thing to do is cultivate a relationship with yourself and an understanding of
mm.
what your needs are. And that can be applied like in every aspect of your life and all of the pillars of your life. And so it comes back to like that listening to yourself, like what are your needs, like what are your thoughts, what's your health like, listening to your body, and having that relationship so that it's not a surprise that has to hit you with a 2x4. That's all of a sudden like, oh crap, I've been going down the wrong road for 10 years and ignoring myself the whole time. So I think that can be like the middle ground is like, okay, if you don't want to grow through pain, perhaps just start cultivating that relationship with yourself so that you have that dialogue.
Love that analogy, being hit by a 2x4. That's it's really hit base there. That's awesome. From that perspective, when we look at, and you say cultivating that relationship with yourself, it seems that many people are reluctant to put their needs forward as if though it's a selfish thing to do. Is that from your work with clients that you've worked with, and your experiences as well? Is that something that we need to work through? And when we put it into context of an analogy, or use the analogy of on an aircraft, and hopefully, very few people had the experience or have had to do this, but you're always told, put your mask on first before someone else. And there's a logical reason for that. You can actually help people if you're okay. But we seem to do the opposite with our own lives. Is that what you've seen, where people have this aversion to actually looking after themselves because it seems to be selfish?
I see that for sure with some people. I think it varies for different people, but a large amount of people, maybe particularly women actually, because we tend to be people pleasers and nurturers. And if you have a family or relationship, you often put others ahead of your own needs.
Mm,
But yeah, it depends on the person. And at the same time, like if you think back to the example I gave of me recognizing that I wasn't showing up as my best self because of it, it's so important to put yourself first because
mm,
the help that I was giving in those years or the input I was giving to my partner or friends or even the work I was doing, it wasn't like I just can't imagine how I was like to be around. Like I don't think I was offering my best work, or my best love or my best support for the people around me. And so yeah, I was showing up for them, but could I have shown up better had I put myself first and my health first? And the answer is yeah. So I think
mm,
it's like definitely that mindset shift, but I don't think it's a problem for everybody. I think um, again, it's like the environment thing. So what are the people around you doing and what kind of lifestyle and habits are they supporting or speaking to or giving you space to do?
mm. So from that perspective, is it, when you were going through that experience, what was that wake up like when you look back at it now? How did that, as you say, comparing what you're doing before, and you could have shown up better, which I think, we all had that experience. I know I certainly have when I looked at some of my experiences in the past. How how is it different now? How did that wake up happen from your perspective, going, oh, I could do that differently?
Um, it was it started like with my health, but then I find I have this like vision in my head where it's like when we're maxed out at 100%,
Mm.
Health can be the easiest thing to just make that space. So taking it down to 80% maxed out,
Yeah.
just so you have the space to think differently or to
Mm.
think, oh, there's something else out there. Oh, there's another way of doing this. And
Mm.
so for me, that was the case. And I think it could be the most easy gateway into self-development or like self-inspection.
Mhm.
And so for me, that was health. So
Mhm.
once I had made enough wiggle room in my diet and exercise, it's like I could finally breathe and have the space to kind of dig deeper and ask more questions. Because the other thing is once you get an easy win like that,
Yeah.
you kind of get hooked. You're like, oh, what else can I do? What else can I explore? So it was a bit of both.
How much from that perspective, when you talk about listening to yourself, did it come back to actually really listening? Because a lot of the times, and I'm sure we've all had well, most people had this experience, I know I have, where someone will be talking to you using that as an analogy, and you're busy thinking about what you're going to say next, not really listening to what the other person said. And I'm sure we've all done that. Um, if we use that as an analogy for ourselves, how often is it a case of we've got the signals there, but we're just not listening to our body and going, oh, we need to rest. And I notice that now I do that a lot, where I can feel I've pushed really hard because I've had things to do. I had that last night. I had something I wanted to finish, and I worked longer than I was expecting to, and I was tired, and I had to get up early this morning. And I can feel it, and I go, okay, after my interview with Jenalee, I'm going to have a little bit of a rest because I need to, and I've allocated that in my calendar to actually do that, to have a bit of time out time. In the past, I wouldn't have done that because I'm not really listening. How much of it is really as simple as listening to your body, and what can you do to actually listen more to what you need?
Yeah. The practice that I take my clients through, if they haven't been listening to themselves and they don't know how to listen to themselves, is actually through journaling. And so a lot of people will say meditation, which I think people have like mixed feelings about meditation. Some people claim that they can't meditate.
Mm.
So a secret tool I use is journaling because I find when we kind of just get quiet with ourselves and give us the space and just start writing freely, like asking yourself questions, like checking in, say, how do I feel today? And just start writing. What
Mm.
comes out often hasn't even been a thought yet in your head. And so you're kind of bypassing that mental block that you might have with actually listening to yourself.
Ah.
You take pen to paper, it's kind of like a direct messenger system to your inner compass. And so that's a practice I use with my clients often because, yeah, it can be hard to tune in when we haven't been tuning in for so long. I
Mm.
think our bodies hold an immense amount of wisdom that unfortunately we don't tap into as much as we could. We try to operate out of our heads and make everything a logical decision where our intuition and our bodies hold so much more information than just logic alone. And it combines, for example, like past experiences, evolutionary experiences, subconscious things like
Mm.
unspoken communication between people, like just sensory things. And it
Mm.
combines all of those into our intuition. And so to ignore that, because and that takes listening. And so to ignore that, we're ignoring a whole wealth of knowledge. And so yeah, I think it's really important to try and foster that ability to tune into your intuition or just have that conversation with yourself. And yeah, journaling is a huge part of that.
From that perspective, when we're tuning into ourselves, as you're talking there, the journaling will help. But from what I was hearing, that people have this tendency to, because you said just write, because if we think about it, your thought process is going to probably filter it, and you're going to have other things come through. How much of that, that filtering process is because, we want things to be different than when they are. We have an expectation, and I think we've all seen the charts where it shows, there's two two roads. It says this is the plan, and you've got this really smooth road going from start to finish, and then the reality, what happens? It's like stuff everywhere, going up and down, and rivers and all things you've got to go through. How much of the anxiety and stress that we feel do you think is linked to that expectation or perception of what it's going to be being incorrect from reality, and us wanting it to be incorrect rather than going, okay, the journey is going to be have its ups and downs. It's going to have some challenges, and that's okay. That's part of the journey.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's that again, like I think it's a societal thing in a way, or like just the programming that
Mm,
you're told like you need to do these steps in life, like you need to hit these major milestones in life,
mm,
and you need to set goals and you need to meet those goals, and it creates like a really narrow focus on how your life should play out.
mm,
So I encourage people to more have a vision of what that life might look and feel like.
mhm,
So what would it feel like if I was living this life? And you get more of like you're tuning into your body more. You're
mm,
getting more of those sensations and like a general idea of what your life could look like. And you're
mm,
giving yourself that full permission to dream. But
mm,
it's the how you get there is where you can leave that up to, I guess, what unfolds, like, trusting that what unfolds will be for the best, and knowing that, like, you at a certain point, you don't have control over every little thing, and you don't know what's best. Like, when you created that really rigid goal and plan for your future, you also took on the fact that I know what's best. I know the only way to do that thing. Like, it's a lot of ego talking, right?
yeah,
And so to release that and just understand that, okay, I might not know the best way and there could be a better way, and I'm open to experiencing a different way of achieving what I want to achieve. I think it kind of just opens yourself up to receive some really cool experiences, but also
mm.
see life from that bigger picture perspective and find a little more joy and happiness along the way.
I love what you just said there about opening up to receive. And from that perspective, when you're dealing with people, how much, and from your own experience as well, how much of that change can happen much quicker when you actually, A, have a clear direction that you're going, but two, opening up to receive what's going on around you. And I'll quote Shakespeare here. It's one of my favorite quotes, is from Hamlet, where it's written, "Nothing is good or bad, thinking makes it so." And so, what I'm wondering from that perspective, how much of the problems do we have are linked to us having that perception, and we think it's a problem, so then we've got to fight through it and struggle through it. Whereas if we think of it as an opportunity or something that's going to serve us, and it might be a case where we just literally don't have enough experience to know that,
Mhm.
to know how to do something. The reason we're challenged in doing something is we don't have the experience in doing it. How much of it, the struggle that we face, comes back again to that perception of, okay, this is a problem that I have to face, rather than maybe I just need to learn something new?
Arguably all of it. Depends who you talk to, but there's
Yeah.
a lot of teachers out there that, and like even that quote says, like it's all part of our mental construct, and so
Mhm.
our experience is entirely up to us. And so
Mm.
if we're putting that lens on our experiences,
Mm.
I mean, that's on us. And it's also on us to shift and be like, oh, is this a gift? Like, I wasn't expecting this, but this could be really cool. Like, let's follow this. That
Mm.
shifts your entire experience from a problem to now an opportunity. And the only difference was your perspective. So, arguably, it's 100% on you.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that's easier said than done for sure. One of my favorite books, and it's one that I re-listen to, which I'm currently re-listening to, is The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer.
Okay.
He wrote The Untethered Soul,
Yeah.
but the surrender experiment is an autobiography of his life and the way
Mm.
that he went along with the pulls of life instead of according to his preferences. And it's remarkable the things that happened in his life because of his willingness to kind of let go of his perceived idea of the way things needed to go.
Mm.
So I listen to that every few years or so because it's just a reminder of how much our perspective shift can really impact the way that our life plays out. And so if it's something that like sparks for somebody, it's a really great book to have some inspiration on how to achieve that. And I'm not saying we'll all achieve his level of mastery of the surrender, but even if you can move your scale just a little bit more to surrendering to what's happening, yeah, I think it'd be a massive impact on your experience.
It's fascinating that you said that about going back to the book regularly.
Mhm.
Years ago, I used to read all the books, everything, and my life really didn't change um, because I wasn't integrating any of it. I was just reading it. It was on the surface. And then, for whatever reason, there was a book. It's not a book. It's actually an audio from Wayne Dyer called "How to Be a No Limit Person." And then I listened to that over and over again, and I still, like you just said, I go back to it regularly. It's very old, but it's really cool. It's actually hard to get a copy of, um, a clean copy where it sounds good because most of them are
Yeah.
scratched because it's that old. How much of that are the problems that we face? Is that again we're just dealing with this on the surface, and we're not really surrendering, as you said, that we need to make that change.
Yeah, I think we all probably go through like I did that too, like where I'm just seeking information from outside of me as much as I can get
Mm.
at like an insane pace where it makes sense that nothing really is sinking in. Like, yeah, you might take away a couple things from this book and a couple things from that book, but if you're in that state of constantly seeking outside of yourself,
Mm.
I think that's the key. Like, you need to turn that back into that integration and seeking that wisdom that you do have inside of yourself. Like we were just talking about with journaling, like there
Yeah.
is so much information that we hold inside of ourselves. And even, yeah, if we just spent more time contemplating those things that really stand out to us and give that more minutes in our lives, more moments in our lives to really sit with it and contemplate it, I think we'd get a lot more out of it than if we were just constantly consuming and seeking for things outside of us that didn't really resonate, but we just need more information, you know?
From your perspective, when you talk about that, what I'm hearing from you is you went through a time where you took some solitude. Maybe not, you didn't go on a monk retreat for 3 months or something like that, but you took some time out to do some journaling by the sounds of what I'm hearing, if that's correct. How does
Yeah.
someone go to being being busy, doing busy work? That's what I call it, busy work, where you're just doing all this stuff and not really achieving anything, or certainly not changing. How did you go from that perspective of being busy with the corporate job that you had to then going, actually, I need to take some time here? 'Cause how do you fit that in when you're really busy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a matter of prioritizing it. I think knowing that you need that and then making it a priority. So saying no to other things for whatever period of time, just giving yourself permission to spend time alone. So
Mhm.
I would find that in just random evenings. I'm like, I'm having a bath tonight and I'm journaling and maybe I'll read a book. I don't know, like not a lot of pressure, but
Don't
just
take your
that
Kindle
time,
into the bath.
yeah, just that time alone to sit with myself and tune in and contemplate and mull over those ideas that have been standing out to me lately. So I think it's like a practice that should be
Mm.
integrated into a regular part of your life. And if it's not daily, even for 5 minutes daily, then set a date once a week in your calendar, like a date with yourself, or, but just intentionally set aside that time and prioritize it.
Because you mentioned before too that some people don't like meditating. And from that perspective, and you've said journaling as well, uh, I've down here at the beach house, I got rid of my gardener and I bought a self-propelled lawnmower. And I do what I call gumping. I'm Forrest Gump going up and down the lawn. I don't, have to walk behind it. So I'm getting that walk. And sometimes I put headphones in and not have them on just so no one disturbs me. Um, can that be something that people do? I mean, I know that works from my perspective, but is there other
Yeah.
ways that you can do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just that space that you need to have a moment with
Mm.
your thoughts, right? Or a moment with
Uh,
your body, like either or. And so if that's the soothing sound of a lawnmower, then
it's
so be
electric, so it's pretty quiet.
it. Okay. But yeah, it could be different things for a lot of different people. And don't think that your way has to look like someone else's way. And that's where that meditation thing is, people have this idea of like, well, now I have to meditate or go to a silent retreat or be a monk, where there's so many ways you can integrate it. And maybe it's going for a drive with an audiobook by yourself, or maybe it's just laying in your local park under a tree for a while and just being in nature by yourself. So there's so many ways that you can integrate that space into your life. Um,
Mm.
and also a caveat, I do meditate, but I also recommend, like, when people's their idea of meditation can be a little skewed, and I really like the Insight Timer app. So a
Okay.
guided meditation that's more like a talk. So
Mm.
it's more like just taking you somewhere. So it's not, the pressure isn't on you just to sit in silence for
Yeah.
20 minutes, but it's like a form of meditation that's really supportive when, yeah, you're just getting into it or you're not sure where to start.
I had flashbacks then when you mentioned about laying in the park, because I used to love sitting there on a hill, just looking at the clouds and imagining stuff in the clouds. I used to think there were spaceships behind there, but that was fun.
Oh, yeah. Well, apparently there might be now.
Okay, from that side of things, giving yourself permission to do what's right for you. I find, I mean, especially now when we look at the social media age where everyone's looking at what everyone else is doing, and that's really just a snapshot. How important is it, and how does someone go, hey, this is right for me, and it doesn't matter what everyone else thinks? I was unfortunately, when I was younger, I had a mother who was very much, she used to wear, before beanies were cool, she used to wear beanies because it was cold. She was practical. And I hated it. It was like, it was like, that's so embarrassing. Don't do it. And she used to say, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. And as a child, I hated that. But as an adult, I'm like, how wise is that? That's so cool. And I'm glad that I had that in me.
Yeah.
But how does someone go to that when we're in this age where everyone's looking at what everyone's doing, especially on social media? Not only are they looking, we actually touch everything up to make ourselves look prettier and give ourselves this persona that everything's perfect. When in reality, we've all got challenges to go through. How does someone go, okay, I need to do what's right for me?
Yeah, I think it's part of that conversation or that connection with yourself.
Mm,
There's an exercise that I give people to do to tune in to like what feels good for them.
mm,
Um, Especially, yeah, like you said, with social media, there's a lot of people around diets and exercise and routines and biohacking, like you name it, where everyone should be doing this and everyone should be eating this. And, I think part of it's like a shock factor, like a hook to get people to watch the content.
yeah.
Part of it, maybe they do believe that everyone should be doing that, but I don't think that there is a blanket statement for everybody in
Mm,
any in any industry that should be, marketed as they do market. And so a huge thing again is having that relationship with yourself to be able to tune in and know what feels good and expansive to you. And so
mm.
the exercise I do is just called like breathing into it. Like if you've ever heard someone say, "Oh, just breathe into it." Um, it's literally just taking a deep breath.
Mm,
So holding, say, what's two opposing things in mind? Say a vegan diet and a carnivore diet.
mhm,
And so maybe the third is like intuitive eating.
yeah.
So holding one of them in mind and taking a deep breath in and just seeing how expansive your breath can go. And
Mm,
so when I breathe into a carnivore diet, my breath stops like right about here. Like I can't,
Yeah.
it feels like constricted and not very expansive. And that's your body's way of telling you
Hmm.
that doesn't feel good to me. Like it's that message. And then if you hold a vegan diet, for example, and again, this is like an individual basis, and you breathe deeply into it, it might
Mhm.
feel a bit more expansive for you. You might be able to breathe up here. And then when you think about the intuitive diet, as you breathe, like just tuning in, breathing into it,
Yeah.
it could feel just so expansive. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's for me. So it's this really, it works. Like it sounds too simple to be true, but if it's hard to kind of get a yes, no answer out of your body, like in your mind's eye, then this is a really great exercise where you can really feel it. You're like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Okay,
Yeah.
and it's different for each person.
I love that. That's awesome. When you were talking about, though, I mean, you went to the diets. I went straight to a Star Trek or Star Wars.
Okay, it works for that too.
So it was like, but that I love that for the listeners, that this breathing into it. That's an awesome way of putting it. How to find what's right for you, because that's one of the challenges I think people have is how do we shut that off? I know from my perspective, it's been about 8 years now. I turned my phone to silent. I turned all my alerts off on my computer. I don't know how many emails I've, have the little, it has a little icon that tells you you've got X amount of unread emails. I turned that off. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I've got an email until I look at the program. And then for me, that was really transformative in the way that I lived my life because I wasn't getting interrupted all the time. For a start, so it's
Mhm.
great for time management. Given that I run a program on that, it was probably a good thing. But how much of that is it as simple as turning things off? Can people just do that?
You mean in order to tune in to themselves,
Yeah,
or
just to find that space, because a lot of the times I mean, from what I've seen, people, their phone will be constantly, when they're out and their phone will be constantly binging and they're checking it and they're very reactive. Is it, that making that conscious choice? How do you make that choice when you're so used to, I guess what I'm putting it in the context, I remember I was getting a lot of, I'd signed up for a number of things that are, when I bought something, I got the subscription for the newsletter, that kind of thing. And I was getting all these emails. And finally, it was too much. As much as there was some cool stuff there that I would have liked to buy, I unsubscribed for everything. And what happened was all of a sudden there was this void
Mhm.
and I'm going, where are my emails? And I became almost like I was chasing it. So how does someone overcome that and go, actually, I can turn this off?
Yeah, I think it's the meaning, the stories that we tell ourselves around it. And so, especially like when I was in the corporate world, it was especially running an event, that people are off site, so you kind of have to be on call 24/7.
Mm,
I was always on edge, like I was waiting for that text or that call or that email, right? And
mm,
so the story I had around that was like, it's my responsibility to be available 24/7. Like, so it's shifting
yeah.
what those stories are for you. And so if the story is that if you don't answer an email within an hour that you're irresponsible, then that's something that you have to work through on its own. And so it's uncovering what those stories are for you of why you can't unplug, or
Mm,
why you shouldn't turn off your notifications, or and
yeah.
then to be like, is that true? Like, is that my perception, or is that actually true? Like, or
Mm,
uncovering the root of those stories. So yeah, it's going to be different for each person of the reason why it's
yeah.
difficult, but there's ways that you kind of uncover what that is for you.
I love what you've talked about there about having the stories and understanding what those stories are. Because I remember from my experience, I was looking at it going, okay, well, important people, you can't just contact them immediately. Like Mary Barra of, GM, you couldn't just ring her up and say, hey, and she'll answer the phone because she won't do it.
Yeah.
She's an important person. So I'm an important person. So maybe you can't contact me straight away.
Yeah, and there's some amazing tools like on phones these days that really help you enforce those boundaries too.
And you can have people, I mean, well, obviously there's a message there that you can go to a message. Obviously, there were some jobs where, you have to be on call for that time. But what we're talking about is outside of that, when you're not there, when your job is out, to not be there.
Mhm.
If you're a currency trader and have to be awake 24/7, which I did once, which is insane and stupid, um, that just is really stressful. Waking up every 4 hours to check what the market's doing. Don't do that. Highly recommend. Don't do that. Um, so from this perspective as well, when we're dealing with these expectations that we have, um, there's a lot out there of, obviously with kids getting participation trophies. Everyone's got to feel good about that. And then in life doesn't always go that way. If there's an organization, if you're applying for a job, then there's one position and then there's 10 people applying, 9 people are not going to get it. They're not going to. How much of this do we need to understand that failing is okay, and it's part of what happens in life, and it's how much and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's really linked to that concept of surrendering and letting go because it's it also applies to failures. So if you don't get that job that you interviewed for, instead of being hung up on that job, being open to, oh, that means there's like a better job for me out there. Like it's a completely different mind shift and it speaks to your ability to be resilient. And
Mm,
so I think there has been a shift perhaps since when you and I went to school versus what's in schools today that in attempt to, I guess, not hurt feelings or to be ultra inclusive,
mm,
we're kind of foregoing some of those core teachings that, we had to deal with growing up that have put us in the positions that we are today, that have given us those skills of resiliency.
mm,
Um, and so I think we're kind of missing that when we take that away from kids because there are ways that you can frame failure and exclusion or what have you in that bigger picture sense of that sense of surrender and sense of still joy and happiness without focusing on the negative.
mm.
Um, and yeah, I think it's important to kind of bring us all back to that space where we can, foster that part of ourselves.
How much of that do we link to and separating who you are as a person from your behaviors? And I'll relay this from a story. A long time ago, I was helping out at a wedding, and I probably didn't have the best communication skills a long time ago. Um,
Mhm.
and there was a place for the bride to park when the bride's car came, and someone parked there. So I've stormed over and gone, "What the hell are you parking there for?" and jumped down the guy's throat. And he's there with his girlfriend or wife or whatever, and obviously he's embarrassed, she's embarrassed, and I look at that now and I go, "Well, that's probably not the best behavior." But I'm looking, going, "Well, my intention was to look after the bride." Now, yes, I could deal with things differently, and certainly if that situation came up today, I would deal with it very, very differently. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't feel bad about who I am because I know that in my heart that I'm a good person. I've got
Mhm.
behaviors that, even today, I look at always learning how to do things differently and more effectively and in ways that make other people feel better.
Mhm.
How do we separate those two? That, who we are, we are wonderful because we exist. We have
Mhm.
behaviors that maybe could do with some improvement, and that behavior doesn't mean that you're a bad person.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a key aspect is getting curious. Getting curious why we would respond that way, like, if that's the
Mm.
way that it was modeled to us when we were younger, or if we were like, it was maybe a part of yourself was, took that job really seriously and just wanted to make sure that it was done right, so you were kind of already elevated a bit, and when
Ah,
there was an opportunity
yeah.
to correct, like, you jumped right in, and so I think part of it's getting curious, and again, it's that communication with ourselves of
Mm,
accepting ourselves, but also opening that dialogue and understanding, like, why we do the things we do.
mm,
I know for my journey, my relationship and my communication with other people, when that part came up for me to review, I actually took a course on communication, and, I really dove into what that would look like for me,
mm,
and I think the biggest takeaway I can give to anyone that's like struggling with communication, so either being taken differently than what you intended, like if people often receive you in a different light than what you think you're putting out there, I think the biggest thing you can do is to get curious, and that even comes into your communication. So perhaps instead of approaching the wedding guests with "What are you doing? Get out of here!" it'd be like, "Hey, uh, just wanted to see like what I don't know if you know, but like this is reserved for the bride. Like, can I
Mm,
ask?" So it's that bringing curiosity
yeah.
to everything really softens the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see other people. And it just instantly creates like a softness and an openness. And so if we can bring that to ourselves, then it
Yeah.
softens and opens the way we relate to ourselves, but it also allows us to bring that to the way that we relate to other people. And so it's just like a more conducive place for dialogue or vulnerability or like safety.
I love that, getting curious about that. So it opens up to other possibilities and what you may have already pre-framed is the situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. What about from the perspective of this sense of control that we feel that we need to have? Where do you think that comes from, and how do we manage that? Because there are circumstances that are just out of our control. So how do we deal with that?
Hmm. I think it's probably a lot to do with ego, if I were to guess. Um, I think we all have that ego that likes to believe, again, like they know the best way. They're in control. They
Mm,
and part of it, I think, is an effort to have safety too, to find safety, to create safety, is to be in control. That
mhm,
control equals safety. And
okay.
as we all know, there's no such thing as being in control
Mm,
at the level of life, the way the life is. We're kind of not entirely in control of the outcome of everything around us. So I think part of it is seeing that that is a part of you, like that wants to control, and like just kind of separating yourself from that feeling of needing to control a situation. Again,
mm,
like creating that space or that step backwards to the bigger picture. And maybe it's just giving yourself some compassion for behind that control is actually like some fear. Like, I actually
mm,
just really want to feel safe right now, and I don't feel safe. So I'm trying to
yeah.
control everything around me so that I feel safe. Or uh, sometimes, yeah, it's usually rooted in fear, but you can evaluate your own beliefs around what you might be fearful of that are behind that sense of wanting to control something around you.
That's what I was wondering as you were saying that. I'm glad you brought up fear, because this sense of control, the bravado that's put out there, we work and we pretend. They talk about it as being imposter syndrome. And you're presenting this person that you're not. And I was just wondering how much of that is linked to that fear and an insecurity that people are going to find out, hey, maybe you're not that, and then that's a negative. How much of that do you think is linked together, and how can we overcome
I think all of it.
that?
That's been my answer a few times. Yeah, I really do think everything is rooted in fear from a place of like we need energy to survive, right? And so a lot of this is the need for control is a power struggle, and we're all trying to kind of get energy from one another because that's the only way we know how to survive.
Mm,
Where in a peaceful existence or a healthy existence, you actually can get energy from nature or
mm,
um, a higher source or what have you. But
yeah.
it's not healthy to be in that power struggle dynamic with other people. And so I think a lot of that stems from fear of not being in control or not having the upper hand or not being able to get your needs met.
Mm,
And it just kind of perpetuates because if I'm coming at you with that energy, it's going to put you in that same space because now it's a battle for for who has that energy, right? So it's I think fear is like the underlying source of most conflict and desire for control.
Yeah, that's interesting. You really pricked up my attention there with the energy component, and I was linking that as you were talking about, because a lot of times we want stuff, so we want to feel validated, we want to feel secure, so we're taking, which takes a lot of effort. So that's energy on our behalf taking that, and I was wondering, from as you were talking there, can we shift that rather than, which is exhausting, taking is exhausting because it
Yeah.
takes a lot of effort. Whereas I've always wondered about from the perspective of when you give to someone, it does so many wonderful benefits for yourself mentally,
Yeah.
physically. And I'm just wondering, because that energy component that you talked about, whereas you can channel energy from nature, as you referenced, and part of that is if you're giving, but all of it as giving, rather than people being defensive and you've got to try and force that energy to get that energy by putting it out there, all of a sudden barriers come down and energy comes back to you. Is that, I'm just exploring that now because I was just thinking about that as you were talking. Is there a logic to that, or am I a little bit crazy?
Yeah. Have you ever read the Celestine Prophecy?
I've no, I haven't. I've summarized it. I haven't read it in detail, no. But
Okay, because
yeah.
some of their core concepts around the four control dramas. So kind of what I was talking about, and they talk how energy moves between people.
Mm,
And so absolutely, I think giving is like a great antidote to the taking.
yeah.
Because giving also like you get more, like giving energizes you more than
Mm,
it's worth what you're giving
mm,
always. But they're also, they do have tactics in the book on how to stop those controlled dramas from playing out. Because
okay.
sometimes if you're on the receiving end of someone trying to take your energy and get
Mm,
your attention constantly because they want your energy, it's really hard to kind of end that. Um,
mm,
and what's in that book, the teachings are around illuminating truth. So instead of kind of getting on their level and going back and forth with that control drama,
mm,
it's kind of just naming what's happening. It's like, oh, it feels like you're trying to tell this story about what's happening here. So it's like just naming the what you see happening ahead of, like in front of you,
yeah.
and maybe it's naming the fact that it feels like they actually might be scared and they want to talk about it, or
Mm,
um, that there's something underlying. And so bringing that to light immediately stops that control drama from perpetuating any further. So
mm,
that's another side to it. So if you're not on the trying to get side, like if you're not the one perpetuating it and you're on the receiving end of it, there are ways around it. But yeah, giving is always like a beautiful practice to center
mm.
your life around too.
To find that out, to go through that experience, I mean, an example I have was when I was younger. I remember sitting in my car, in the car park by myself, playing a sad song about why nobody will love me. I can't remember what the title was, but it was something along those. And I'd play it, rewind it. I'm crying my eyes out, going, "Why won't anybody love me?" And and it was all about me. And a week later, I think it was about a week later, I went and helped out at a charity event. There's this massive lunch in this huge marquee in the center of one of the big parks in the city, and it was for homeless people. And they put in this special event, and I was helping out at that, and just the connection I had with the people was completely different. And it was one thing that stood out for me, and maybe it's a boy thing, but the organizer was, he needed something. So, oh, can you go and get this for me? And he threw me his car keys, and he had this beautiful, brand new exotic car. I can't remember what it was, but it was, something like a Mercedes or something. I can't remember what it was. And I was like, you're trusting me with your car to go and get this stuff, and it just changed my perspective. Is it as simple as that to go shift it from, what me to outside of other people? And how do you do that in that moment when you're sitting there in your car with a tape deck, rewinding it backwards and forwards? How do you shift to go, how do you have that wake up and go, I just need to help someone else?
Um, yeah, I think it is a practice too of being able to kind of see the bigger picture in things. So usually when we're in that state, something's triggered us. And for yours,
Mm.
I'm guessing it was a breakup or some kind of rejection that made you want to listen to this tape. And so that's probably triggering deeper parts of you that you're not enough and whatever stories that might have been, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to shift out of it if we still are stuck in those stories.
Mm.
So again, it's like through that evolution of developing a practice of connection with yourself and
Mm.
journaling and seeing what comes up and getting curious with yourself and uncovering what stories you're holding. Because the more we can kind of bring awareness to those, we can choose differently in the moment. So I think like therapy is a great way to bring awareness to things, but sometimes you can spend a lifetime just intellectualizing
Mm.
different things that have happened to you.
Yeah.
Whereas like the integration part is recognizing when those things come up and then in that space of recognition, choosing a different outcome or choosing a different response, right?
Mm. I love that word.
But it's
Go.
yeah, but it's a practice. Like I don't think there's like a quick way to tell that version of you in the car to snap out of it. It's all part of your lesson. It was that point where you're at in your life at that moment where
Mm.
what you were feeling was definitely most important at that moment.
Is that something from the perspective, again, coming back to what you mentioned earlier about the people that you surround yourself with? By surrounding yourself with people that are more in that mindset, then you're more likely to do something different.
Yeah, like if you had that example of perhaps you'd say one of your best friends just went through a breakup a month prior and he was like, "Yeah, you know what? It hurts, but I know that it's not about me. I know that there were some things like I
Mm.
think there's someone better out there for me and you know,
Yeah.
I'm just really grateful for my friends." Like if that's how he approached a
Yeah.
breakup, and then you had that as an example, it
Mm.
probably in that moment you'd reach out to him and you'd be like,
Mm.
"Hey," you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, environment is huge. And
Mm.
you know, we cope with things to the best of our ability, like to the level that we know how to cope with things. And
Mm.
so the more that you can expand your circle or be influenced by people that have better coping strategies or have done some work on themselves or have a really good relationship with themselves, the more you'll be exposed to what else is possible. And so in
Mm.
those moments of pause where you only know how to do that thing you've been doing for your whole life,
Yeah.
you'll now have like a bigger perspective of like, oh, okay, that person did this. Let's give it a
Mm.
shot. Like, let's try this alternate response and see what happens.
How much of that is habit and then changing that? Because you mentioned about journaling, which is a great way of becoming aware of that and then changing that habit. Because I look at it and I was surprised. I was listening to some people talk on a podcast, and they started it by asking each other how they ranked out of 10 on the day. How was their day out of 10? And one said there was a 6 because X, Y, and Z had happened. The other one was an 8, and I was shocked by that. But maybe I've forgotten because for me, every day is awesome, literally,
Mhm.
because my at the start of the day, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to do all this great stuff. At the end of the day, I go, this is what I did. And I
Mhm.
focus and I've trained myself to focus on the things I did and only
Mhm.
that, not the things I didn't do, because the list that you didn't do can always be massive. It's huge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'll be going, I did that and I did that, and I should celebrate that. Well, not should I am celebrating that. That's awesome that I did this. I got this done, and and the simple things is including I had time for myself. I took some space out. I went for a walk, or I just relaxed. All those things where I needed it, but I've trained myself to that. Is it as simple as that? For me, it was simply just going, I'm going to change the habit, and I did it, and it I think maybe that's using the surrender analogy. Maybe I did surrender and just went, I'm just going to do that. And it seemed to happen really quickly. Is it part of that process of surrendering and just changing your habit?
Yeah, I think it depends on the habit.
Mm,
Something like journaling, like if you have a
mm,
vested interest in, you're like, man, I really want to know what I'm thinking on the inside or what my
mm.
body's telling me.
Yeah.
You might have like a vested interest in developing that habit. So I think it depends on the habit and how invested you are into that change.
Mm,
Some things like around beliefs and triggers or traumas like that are taking you
mm,
to a spot, or if it's a like a pattern that's just playing out, those things can be harder to break. It's not just about willing your way out of it by
mm,
any, but if you can bring awareness to those parts of you that are showing up in those moments, it's the start of the shift, like just
mm.
the awareness. And I find the awareness can create the space in that moment, like a microsecond. So instead of you just living out the same response every time you get broken up with, it's just your
Yeah.
go-to response. Having that awareness, so having that dialogue with yourself and
Mm,
becoming aware of that response, that automatic response,
yeah.
can create just a millisecond of space. So the
Mm,
next time it happens, you're like, oh, okay. And like it just gives you that second to choose differently. And you still have to will yourself to choose differently. But
mm.
before you weren't really giving yourself a choice. Whereas now you have that second to just then make that choice and determine that, yes, I'm going to shift this habit. I'm going to try something different this time.
How important is that space that you mentioned? Because I remember I have a friend who's a karate sensei, seventh dan black belt, and he talks about the first thing you need to do, doesn't matter in any just or not dispute, any conflict, and that could be conflict within yourself, is put distance between it. So how important is that, and how do you do that? How do you give yourself that space?
It's super important because oft like um, these responses kind of run in our subconscious. So we're not even aware that we're in this
Mm.
response. And then it's like after the fact, we're like, oh, I can't believe I responded like that. Like you didn't give yourself that opportunity to respond any differently than you did.
Mm.
So it's so important to be able to create space. And again, it's those practices. So it's that journaling, that self inquiry. Maybe it's that meditation. Maybe it's just those tuning in moments that you give yourself mowing the lawn. Like,
Mm.
just those are the spaces that being, it's like giving yourself permission to have space in your day, to have time alone, to have time with your thoughts gives permission to that for that space to come up when you need it to come up too. So it's like the more you get familiar with what space feels like, the more it'll show up in the parts of your life that you really need it to show up.
Okay. And I wonder from that perspective as well, how much the beliefs that we have, and I read somewhere, I know Wayne Dyer talked about this a lot, but there's a number of people talked about that beliefs are just a thought that you've repeated over and over again.
Mhm.
So, and we believe, and then we believe that our beliefs are the beliefs, or our reality is the reality. And it
Mhm.
becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where we actually then start to reinforce and see only the things that reinforce what we believe. How how can we become aware of that and realize that there's actually just our reality isn't necessarily the reality?
Yeah, it's interesting because the way like it works energetically is your beliefs kind of like live in your energy field like little Polaroid pictures, right? Of your experiences that you've kind of posted out there as being true to you.
Mm,
And so not only does it impact, it filters the way you see the world, but it also filters the way people respond to you. And
mm,
so that's where it is a self-fulfilling prophecy by holding these beliefs. Um, an exercise I do with my clients to kind of establish what their beliefs are around, I literally get them to write out the different categories in life, say relationship, finances, um, work, whatever. And like, what are my beliefs about work? And just tapping into like what you are aware of. Like, oh, I believe that life isn't fair. I believe that money is the root of all evil. Like, those are those phrases that might be popping into your head when you think about what are my beliefs around this.
Mm,
And then the second step is to evaluate, are they my beliefs? Like, did I inherit this from somebody around me?
mhm,
Is it an old belief that's outdated that I'm still operating by?
mhm,
Does it serve me to hold this as a belief? Like, is there any benefit to me believing this to be true and like holding it so tightly? And there are things that we can choose to hold as beliefs. If we take it through those steps and we're like, yes, this is still my belief, then by all means. But ultimately, there's not really anything out there that serves us to hold on to that tightly as our belief.
yeah,
I think it serves us more to be very open to understanding that we don't know everything. And so
mm,
having that open mind and not being super anchored to any belief, being like, well, I think this might be the case, but I'm open to it being different. Like that's a great place to be because you have a loosely held belief
mm.
and you're also acknowledging that you don't know everything that there is to know. So you're open to receiving again. You're open to receiving experiences that might show you otherwise, or they might reinforce your belief, and that's fine too. But
Mm,
kind of just bringing it from the subconscious to the conscious, because I think a lot of us are walking around with beliefs that aren't ours,
mm,
that we've inherited at some point from our family or ancestors, from our environments, and they're really impacting our ability to make changes in our life,
mm.
and they're really impacting the way our life plays out, like you said, like the self-fulfilling prophecy.
And I think that's an important point that you noted there, that we don't know everything, and I think honestly say for the listeners, if I can make that change, because I knew everything when I was younger, you couldn't tell me anything. So if I can make that change, I think anybody can. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the that you've got and the programs that you run there. I mean, firstly, what was the motivation to start Expert You?
Yeah, so it was in that health journey where I was looking for ways, to kind of I was diagnosed with a form of autoimmune, and I was looking for ways. I'm like, "Okay, what do I do now?" Right?
Mm.
And I was looking to doctors and specialists, and all they said was, "Well, if you get more pain, then you get another surgery." And I was like, "What? Like, that doesn't sound promising. Like, I don't want to accept that."
Yeah.
So I did more research on my own, and that led me to going on an anti-inflammatory diet, and within 1 month, all of my symptoms went away.
Oh, wow.
And so it just kind of brought up that question of like, how come the experts aren't telling us
Mm,
something like a simple diet change could really impact chronic pain, Um, and it just really enforced the fact that I think we all like no one can tell us what our bodies need, even the experts. They're usually reluctant to tell us what might work for us.
mm,
And so it's really like taking that power back, and making yourself the expert on your body, on your career, like on your health, whatever it is.
yeah.
And so that's what a lot of my work is, and I've shared some of those practices here today, is giving you the tools to be your own expert and
Mhm.
tuning into your body and making that connection and using that in your life and not relying on sources of information outside of you if it doesn't feel true to you.
Mhm. And from that perspective, you've got on your website, you have the 90-day accelerator program and one-on-one work. What can people expect if they were to work with you? What sort of things do you take them through?
Yeah, we go through a foundations of environment and energy. So again, first thing is to kind of assess like what's impacting us right now.
Mm,
Because if we don't fix those things, but then try to fix the end result, those things are still going to keep impacting you, and you're going to question why you're not making the changes that you want to make in your life.
mm,
We also then move through just getting clear on who you are, like what your purpose is, what your gifts are, what's unique to you,
yeah.
and shifting the perspective of purpose to what you do, to your essence or your way of being, that you can bring to so many different things that you do. So it really opens up what's possible in your life,
Mhm.
and getting clear on your values, your belief systems, all of those things that we've kind of touched on today. And
Mm.
then with that clarity, then creating alignment in your life, and like, what does that vision for your future look like? And what does it look like to now align with your vision, your values, using your intuition? I teach a lot on intuition as well. Again, being your own expert, like,
Mhm.
what does that look like? And what are those next steps that are aligned with where you want to go that you can take tomorrow? So it's not about knowing the step that you're going to take next year.
Mm.
Again, I think that goes back to that rigid goal setting mindset. Whereas, okay, like, the next aligned action I can take is this. And just
Mm.
knowing that next step. And the bigger picture of the program is along the lines of like a career reinvention. So I found myself in a career that definitely was more draining than energizing. It led to burnout. And so I know there's a lot of people, especially post pandemic, that are kind of feeling stuck and unfulfilled in their careers, feeling like they invested a lot of time and money into something that doesn't feel good to them.
Yeah.
Especially if you've been to school for quite some time and you're in the workforce for 5 or 6 years and you're like, this isn't it.
Yes.
Um, so it's taking you from that place and just reimagining, like, what would a career or role look like that actually ties in your unique gifts and your essence and your level of genius and that environment that really you would thrive in, and that you would be excited to wake up every single day to go into. And that, when people are lit up and doing that thing that they're really good at, it shows. And so it's just a natural magnet for success and happiness and joy and impact, like having an impact on the world and just that
Mm.
fulfillment that they're seeking. So it's a 3-month accelerator program that kind of takes you through all of the steps to get there. I'm including as well a bit more of the tangible tools. Like, there's some bonuses around like how to optimize your LinkedIn profile so it actually speaks to your true strengths and your genius, not just those standard ones that you put on your resume that everyone puts on their resume.
Yes.
How to interview based on those strengths, and
Mm.
taking into consideration that might take some buy-in of the interviewer, because there's still that paradigm that people are looking for the highest producing person for this role, even if it means that they're miserable and burnt out.
Mm.
When you make that shift into showing up like in your passionate genius, like, I'm pretty sure most business owners would rather hire someone that's extremely passionate and in their genius in that role than someone that's strictly a high producer but probably miserable and they're about to burn out and they won't be here that long because it's just not the role for them.
Yeah, and those people are in short supply as well. Those, the latter one that you're talking about, the one that's going to burn out, um,
Yeah,
because there are very few people that can maintain that. And as you said, it's a cost to business. So people that turn up and show that authenticity stand out. Um,
exactly. Yeah, that's
and
what we
also,
need more.
yeah, from that side of things as well, is that part of that? Because when you're looking at it, and you mentioned about your LinkedIn profile, those kind of things, I think it's misunderstood as well when we're trying to be like everyone else. But from a
Mhm.
marketing perspective, out of the 7.9 or 8 billion people on the planet, there's no one like you. So
Mm.
actually getting in touch with who you are in reality is a great marketing tool, is it not? Or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah, no, I think that's our greatest marketing tool is to show up to an interview with that confidence, be like, look, this is my zone of genius. Like, I love doing this. I am so
Mm.
passionate about this. This is how I do it, like bringing that unique essence or way of being to that role.
Mhm.
These are my gifts that support my ability to do this. This is what attracts people to me because I'm doing the thing I want to do. And yeah, seeing if that's a fit for that environment.
Mm.
And so it kind of goes both ways, but when you know when you're so certain and confident in who you are and what you have to offer, that's going to stand out in an interview big time. Like that you can feel that when someone shows up in that space. So yeah, it's kind of magical.
Is that part of what you work with people as well, is finding that fit and understanding that it's about finding a fit? Because often people feel like, oh, they've got to get that job, or I've got to date that person. I've got to, if I don't, and if that doesn't succeed, I'm a failure. But really, it's you're not. It's a combination of both. The employer or your partner, if apply it to a dating setting, potential partner. It's about finding whether you're a good fit. I love those words that you use. Is that part of what you take people through on these programs, about having the confidence that it's about finding that fit?
Yeah, so I take them through, we get very clear on what their purpose is, what their gifts are. We use human design and gene keys to also add to that.
Mm,
And so I instill it in them, and then I do give them some tools on how to go out into the world and market that and like how to frame that in an interview. But also even just the shift of purpose is in your being than rather the job title that you hold.
mm,
That is a really expansive mindset shift because if we think it's like the only thing I can do is this one job and I have to find this one job, it's so much pressure. It's like a needle in a
mm.
haystack, right? And yeah, it's really limiting in the way that
Mm,
you're approaching things. Whereas when you see, oh, well, it's this essence or way of being that I bring to the table, and I can do it in this setting, in this setting, in this setting, like it just
mm,
opens up what's possible. So you can easily find a fit in multiple different settings.
mm,
Um, because it's just much more expansive. And yes, there might be some skill sets like soft skills that you might have outside of that that would play more to different ones, or maybe there's passions that would play more to other roles or other companies or industries. But yeah, you'll have the tools that you need. I'm still in search of a recruiter that's recruiting based on this type of evaluation, or even
oh,
companies that are hiring based on this type of like placement of placing someone according to their actual, essence and gifts rather than perhaps like what's written on their resume, their practical
mm.
experience.
I would have thought that would be, I mean, from my experience with corporates that I work with, and certainly my own experience, it's generally hiring around character, which
Mhm.
similar, because and character and values, if their values align, the person's values align with the organization, they're going to enjoy being there.
Yeah, and that's why I take my clients through the exercise of
Mm,
getting really clear on their values because it's such a determining factor. If
mm,
it's a tool of discernment in everything you do.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's a great point.
I love the word that you mentioned too. You talked about integration, because there's a 90-day program. I would imagine that you're helping them actually integrate, because unlike me, who read thousands of books and didn't actually integrate anything until he stopped and looked at it properly, sounds like your program, you actually take people through that shift of actually making the change they need to make to get where they want to go. Is that fair to understand?
Yeah, you know what? It's different for each person of where that shift occurs. Like some people, we find that they're actually in a really great role that aligns really well, but they haven't been giving themselves the attention and self care that they need to give. So then that's why they're burning out and that's why it feels heavy. Whereas it's actually very aligned. So then we work more on that aspect of things.
Yeah.
And then other people, yeah, it's time to go. It's time to switch careers and we really get clear on what that looks like for them,
Mm,
and integrating every step of the way. It's definitely very hands-on coaching. It's one-on-one. Like the 3-month program is one-on-one every week.
mhm,
So it can be very. That's why it's the accelerator program, and it depends on the person. Some people like diving into things, and they're like, "I'm just ready." And it might be a time constraint that they have in their current role that they're like, I need to figure this out ASAP.
mm,
I do offer a 6-month version of the same thing as well. It just gives more space for integration. So if you're someone that likes to sit on things and think it through for a while, then
mm.
that's another good option for that.
Awesome. And what's the best way of reaching you? What's to get in contact with you? You've got. I will put a lot of this detail, put these details in the show notes. But what are the best ways of reaching out to you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. So my Instagram is expert.you, Y-O-U.
Mm.
And my website is beexpertu.com. So beexpertu.com.
Awesome. And before we go, to sum this up, something to take the audience to, excuse me, to give the audience something to take away. What would be your nutshell, your key wisdoms? What would you want them to take away from this interview?
I think the biggest takeaway is, if you haven't already, establish a connection and a relationship with yourself, because
Mm,
it's your internal wisdom that's going to tell you if perhaps you need a change, or if what needs to change. Um, and I think you're the only person that can tell yourself that. That's the expert in you. So creating that relationship with yourself so that you can guide yourself where you need to go in life.
wow. Love that. Jenalee, thank you very much for making the time on the show. So much wisdom there. Please, if audience, if you feel that Jenalee would help you, please reach out to her. The details, and we've got them in the show notes. But thank you very much for taking time. It was just such wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation as well.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.